Hello, everyone. This is the Roll for Banter podcast, where we deep dive into all things tabletop related. We're your hosts, August from TTRP Genius,
And I am Anthony from DM Dungeon Mastery.
and today we're joined by Zarek, the lead designer of Indominant. So, whether you're a seasoned game master, a brand new player, or just curious about the world of tabletop gaming, this is the place for you. So, settle in, grab your dice, and let's roll for some banter. Well, welcome to the podcast, Zarek. I've had a chance to look a little bit into Indominant, but not a whole lot. So, for those who haven't seen it or heard about your awesome game, can you give us like the quick Reader's Digest of what Indominant is?
Yeah, so Indominant's a superhero RPG. Big focus of the game design is customization of characters, tactical, strategic combat that's very teamwork oriented. Um, yeah, those are like the big main design kind of philosophies. Also, game balance is a really big one. I'm a huge proponent of game balance. So,
Mm.
um, it's a game where you can expect to be doing a lot of tactical combat and just doing lots of cool stuff with your superpowers, but it's still grounded. It's not like the kind of Superman can fly across the world in 2 seconds sort of thing.
Fair enough. Is it more of like DC vibes or Marvel vibes?
Kind of a mixture. I would say the biggest influence is City of Heroes. There we go. City of Heroes was one of the big influences, along with My Hero Academia. Actually, funny enough.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my wife just got done rewatching, I think for probably like the second or third time My Hero Academia. So I
Yeah,
gotta
it's
I feel like I have a good grasp of what the show is. I haven't actually sat through and watched it all, but I've seen enough through two watch throughs just over like my wife's shoulder.
yeah. So it those are the influences just for that more grounded feel. I've always been a super big Marvel and DC fan. Even some other like Icon comics, stuff like that, or Image. I mean, sorry, Image comics,
Oh yeah.
stuff like that. So I'm a huge comic book nerd, and superheroes is my thing. So that's also why we made a superhero game first.
Oh, absolutely. That's actually interesting because I've been thinking about trying superhero games, and there's like I can't remember the name of it. There's one that has like something in Paragons, and it's a pretty well known tabletop game. I'll put it up here in like the empty square that we have. Um, but for me, like whenever I think superheroes, it's always tough to convert that over to like a TTRPG because some of the issues you have with like balancing in TTRPGs, we'll take Dungeons and Dragons as everybody's familiar with it, is the players become godlike and it's not fun after a while of being godlike. And so keeping that balance, keeping it more like Batman versus Joker, or even some of like the higher end stuff, but how do you guys deal with balancing inside of Indominant to keep the game fun and challenging for players?
Yeah, so pretty much you described a lot of the sort of vibes we go for. It's that like Batman and Joker kind of level stuff. You start out street level
Hmm.
where you've got superpowers, of course, but you're not like blowing up buildings and things like that. And then towards the end of the leveling scale at level 20, you'll start to get into stuff where you can, you might be dealing with threats that are leveling cities or something like that, but
Right?
it solves that problem of like what kind of stories can we tell, or like what can we do if we can just do everything, like I was mentioning earlier, like Superman. What challenges can Superman face? Like he always has to face interpersonal problems, which are good for storytelling in a TTRPG, right? But that's like the only thing that can really feel interesting for him
Hmm.
because he's always going to win because he's just super powerful. So um, yeah, just that grounded feel where you're going to be overcoming challenge, and that's part of the vibes in the game too. Is you got to work with your team to beat the enemies. You know, you won't always be fighting a stronger enemy, but even a level playing field, it's not just like, oh, we're going to win. We have to work together and work hard and be tactical,
Oh,
things like that.
absolutely. I really like those kind of grittier games too, where it's like you start almost like a gutter punk kind of game as I'm coming off of Cyberpunk. Um, where it just starts off like maybe you're the superhero of like this city block, and that's where it starts off, and you're fighting like low level gang leaders and stuff like that,
Mhm.
and then working your way up. So in your game, how do you or is it like class based for how you get your superpowers, or how do you get your superpowers and how do they level up?
So the way character building works is you start by choosing an archetype. That's going to be like your role. We've got Arbiter, Blaster, Bruiser, Guardian, and Hunter. Blaster is going to be dealing damage. Bruiser and Guardian are more your like tough characters. Bruiser's a little more on the offensive side. Guardian's more supportive and team like leader type of character. And then an Arbiter is the range support character, and a Hunter's like a fast mobile rogue.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you pair that with any power set, and we have 10 in the base game in our primer right now, which is our first product. You've got fire, ice, earth, gadgetry, super strength, stuff like that, and that's how you sort of make your class in a way. That way you can be an arbiter using fire powers, and you can heal your allies using fire and stuff like that.
Okay.
Just it's very customizable in that sense. It's not like, oh, I'm using super strength, I've got to be a tough melee guy.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually be a ranged fighter and use super strength and like throw shockwaves, kind of like Jax in Mortal Kombat. Where he like throws the
Oh
purple
yeah.
wave. It's like that kind of theme in a way. And so that's really the core of it. And then thematically, you've got your origin, which is how
Mm-hmm.
you got your powers, like science, technology, even magic, stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, I like that, having the options to kind of play around how you want to without it being completely broken. Like, oh, I want to start off with like heat vision and flight and all this stuff. It's like, nah, you kind of start off a little bit more grounded. So, in the game, how would you go about creating some of like the iconic superheroes, like Spider-Man or like Daredevil?
There's a few ways. So Spider-Man, I'm glad you asked this question. It's a question everybody asks,
Oh
honestly.
yeah.
Um, so we made a video about it because of that. And so really the way I would do it is Spider-Man. I would either pick maybe like a Guardian or a Hunter archetype and then use the super strength powers. And there's nothing with webs in there, but you
Mhm.
can always flavor that as webs. There's a lot of like grappling kind of powers where you're grabbing somebody or immobilizing them, and so you could just theme that as using webs. And then super strength fits Spider-Man pretty well outside of that.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
superhero stuff's not my area of expertise. Not being like I'm not really big into like superhero things personally. The first thing that I started watching recently that like I really started to latch onto was Invincible, because it feels like way more mature. I'm not
Mhm.
saying like superheroes can't be made for like adult audiences, but I think like, like, oh, the spandex wearing Superman, he's clean cut, he never loses unless you have like kryptonite, because they wrote him into being like literally so powerful you can't destroy him. But I like Invincible's take on like, what if he was evil and he decides to start destroying the world and like essentially killing other superheroes. So that's really my area of expertise with Invincible. Obviously, when I was younger, I watched like Tobey Maguire era Spider-Man and
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
a couple Batman movies. So I like Batman, I think, the most for like regular superheroes, like mainstream ones, I would say.
Yeah.
Uh, do you have I want to ask a question about like your higher level stuff. What level is like your max level in your game?
So in our full game, we're going to be going up to level 20 right now, and our primer goes up to 5. And that will get you nowhere near like Superman. That'll get you more to like Fantastic Four, like the really well known, established, powerful superheroes, is kind of like where it'll end off at. Um, Nobody's necessarily flying around, at least during combat, I should say. It's, as I said, it's very grounded. And so if you were to focus all your energy on flying around, you would get tired in this, setting in this world, because that would be very difficult to just like zoom around. So
Do you have like superheroes that are more like how Batman would be, where it's like he doesn't really have powers, he's just
Mhm.
like a guy with all these
He
gadgets and
has the
stuff?
power of money.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So two of our origins to fit thematically, these don't have a lot of mechanical weight, but is natural and technology. So natural could just be like one of my favorite kinds of characters is somebody who's like like a samurai kind of character where they've honed their skills to such a degree that they're like supernatural, but they don't have superpowers. They're just such a good swordsman that they can like, do the kind of meme or whatever where they just like move their sword a tiny bit and cut the apple, like stuff like that, where it's kind of supernatural, but it's not like, it's not Superman. It's more grounded and like realistic in a way.
That's cool. Yeah, like I would say, like if you were to ask me about like superhero stuff, the biggest influences that would come to my mind would be like Incredibles, because I actually like the Incredibles,
Yeah.
Invincible, Batman, and Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, do you have a favorite super villain? Since we're kind of on the topics of superheroes and stuff, figured why not throw some nerd talk in here.
Yeah.
I would say for me, it's surprising, but I actually think Syndrome is like one of my favorite villains for like a superhero movie. He's just like so well written, and I love the way he's like portrayed in Invincible or Incredibles. Sorry,
Yeah.
really
Yeah,
get
I'm glad you mentioned Incredibles. That's another big influence too. I think that's a good way to describe maybe like level 5 to 10, like mid-level characters would be that sort of feel, you know. But to answer your question, Syndrome is a really good one because he's got like that innocent beginning, but he takes what happened to him and it kind of makes him like jaded to superheroes and stuff like that. But I mean, it's a really popular one, but Joker is always really good
Yeah, he's
because
like
it's
awesome.
not
Which
about his.
Joker?
Um, I mean, honestly, I tend to view Joker through the lens of the comic book or like the animated Batman series Joker, where
Yes, Mark
you know,
Hamill's Joker is my favorite Hamill as well, so I'm in that boat with you.
yeah, the voice is so iconic.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, where it's like the problems and the challenge of that villain isn't that he's going to beat the crap out of you. It's that he's going to make life difficult and he's going to be hard to stop because he just won't stop. He's crazy and, he's going to kind of make things more interpersonal or psychological and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have like I would imagine so like when Batman catches Joker, it's like he has every opportunity to just like break his neck and stop his reign of terror, but he never does it. Do you have like an alignment or like a morality system to prevent people who are playing like a Superman or something to not like take the villain and just essentially tear him in half? Or is there just like, hey man, if that's what your superhero would do, he does it?
To a degree, we don't have anything where it's like, hey, you have to follow a moral code.
Mm-hmm.
But in our setting, it's a sci-fi setting as well, and so we have
Oh,
the
that's cool.
Intergalactic Defense Council, which is like um, the Justice League isn't the right way to view it, but there's different aliens that sit on the board. They've got like members that represent their different societies and stuff, and then there's the Galactic Legion United, and that registers the supers as we call them. And so if you're a registered super, generally you have to follow the rules, and you don't have to be a hero. If you're working for the GLU, you can be like a researcher or like a business person and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, maybe if you need to kill, you could, but generally you're not supposed to. You're
It's
supposed to
frowned
follow like
upon.
justice system. But it depends on the group you're playing with. Some people will want to be pretty like violent and lethal, and others will not. So
It's like the Invincible fans versus like the
right,
Pixar Incredibles fans, essentially.
yeah,
That's pretty cool. With your, I don't really know how to word it other than like 5e language. So like with your creature stat blocks, I'm assuming like lower level stuff you would have like your common street thug guy steals a woman's purse and runs down the street. You
Mhm.
fly in and uppercut him into a building or something. Versus like if you don't want to spoil these, you don't have to. But do you have like I always like to ask about high level play because in 5e, that's like the one of the most problematic areas of the whole Dungeons and Dragons 5e system. It's
Mhm.
not properly balanced for high level gameplay past like level 15. And if we're being real,
Yeah.
what are like your high level threats? Do you have like super villains, like genuine super villains, like named characters?
Yes, so we've got a mixture of named supervillains. One of them is X, and I'll have to send you the art for him, but he's just a really powerful supervillain. He's got electricity powers, and he's really fast. And in a way, he's kind of like a Joker, but a little bit more of a physical threat. And then we also have stuff that goes, the threats can be above level 20. And so the very high end, we call them the space worms. They're like space dragons, effectively. But, not necessarily like winged dragons. They'll be a more sci fi kind of theme, but they're, big. They're not bigger than planets, but they're big and they're dangerous and things like that. Very powerful. So,
That's pretty
again,
cool.
not like somebody who's going to destroy the universe in, one fell swoop or
Something
something.
that could swallow a planet or something.
Right. Not like Galactus where they eat planets.
Right.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. I also forgot to mention Teen Titans. That's another
Mhm.
series
Oh,
that
yeah.
like got me like that's where most of my knowledge for like superhero stuff comes from. Not Teen Titans Go,
Yes, no,
not Teen Titans
not
Go,
that.
the original.
Yes, the good Teen Titans.
Yeah, the good one, which is crazy because they're all the same voice actors, but it's just so weird seeing them, and they've been like chibi-fied essentially.
Yeah, the art style, I never could
I
even
hate
try
it.
to watch that because the art
Yeah,
style.
I was gonna say they have these like weird, like adult jokes, like they
Mhm.
had in the original, but it seems like this one's more focused on being made for kids.
It looks that
At
way,
least
yeah.
the one that I seen was an adult
Mhm.
joke. It's
Right.
very, very obviously on the nose
Well, and
adult
like
joke.
that was the kind of my thing is like you went from like the original Teen Titans and it was like very serious and there were very adult moments in there where it was like, hey, like these are serious things. They're dealing with real big issues. And then
It's
now when
almost like
Teen
an
Titans
anime.
Go, exactly. Well, it's almost like it would be like at the end of like a Teen Titans Go episode to be kind of like a like palate cleanser.
I really like Slade. I think he's a
Oh,
really
yeah.
cool villain from Teen
Mhm.
Titans. He's
Yeah.
voiced by Ron Perlman, who has like a really good voice for villains.
Mhm.
Uh,
Actually, I didn't know that was Ron Perlman. Wow.
I'm almost 100% positive it's Ron Perlman. He's
Almost
got such a
100%.
almost I'm like 99% sure. He's got like
I'm not
such an
saying you're wrong.
no, I'm just saying he just has such an iconic voice.
Mhm.
Um yeah, him, and then obviously have you ever seen Invincible?
Yep, it looks like
Yeah,
I
oh,
just
yeah.
looked it up.
Invincible's
Ron
really good.
Perlman, Teen
Yeah.
Titans, voice of Slade.
I just know that because he's also the voice of the Fallout guy, the war never changes.
Mhm.
Uh how do you feel about shows like Invincible where they take the superhero aspect and they dial it up to like Tarantino levels of violence? I thought that was really cool because I love Quentin Tarantino. So like
Mhm.
seeing Invincible grab somebody's head and like make it explode, like I was
Yeah.
like, that's so cool for me. I
Yeah,
like
I
stuff like
think it's a
that.
fun way to go. It's a little more realistic, especially with the level of power that the Viltrumites are in Invincible. Um, I've always said the Guardians of the Globe, they're kind of another good representation of maybe some like mid-level characters in Indominant. With some exceptions like Adam Eve, who can literally just like change the entire planet. Um, but yeah, I think it can fit, right? You just have to have the right people and the right mentality. Um, we kind of have like sometimes we've had groups that play like that, where like they want that sort of feel, and then other times where it's a lot more like campy and like funny. And so either way, it really fits.
That's cool. Yeah, I think that kind of leaves it sort of like open for all levels of or all kinds of play, I should say. It just
Mhm.
like helps like all audiences.
Yeah.
So, what were some of the challenges you've had while creating Indominant?
Um, so right out the gates, I always wanted to. I like character customization and like super deep,
Mm-hmm.
like character building, and so balancing that with trying not to be too complex. So, I don't know if either of you have heard about it, but Mutants and Masterminds. It's one of the most popular superhero TTRPGs,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it does have some flaws, and one of those is complexity. Like me myself, because before I started making Indominant, I was playing a lot of 5e. That was my first kind of foray back into TTRPGs from when I was young, and I wanted to play superheroes, and I looked at that game and I was just like, holy crap, this is so complex. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it felt to me like I needed somebody to teach me how to play. I couldn't just like look it up and learn before I bought the books. I would have had to like buy the books and do a ton of research. And so,
Mm-hmm.
um, balancing that deep character customization with approachability was a really big thing, especially like I said for me. So like the very early iterations, you had a primary and secondary power set, and each power set kind of focused on a specific stat. And so we reined things in a lot where your stats matter based on your archetype. You get certain combat stats, we call them, like your attack modifier, damage modifier, control modifier, defense, things like that. Your archetype determines which of your main 5 stats give you those combat stats.
It's funny that you say that like 5e is like where you started. It's like everybody starts at 5e, and then like I'm kind of experiencing it right now where I want to make a lot of changes to how we play, but I have like the group of players that they're 5e players. They don't want to play anything other than D&D 5e. So like when I try to do changes that like make the game faster, like oh, I'm just going to have the enemies do average damage. They don't actually like that. And
Hmm.
these are all things that like speed the game up. That's one thing that I think a lot of people should keep and take into consideration is like making sure your game is not so crunchy that like oh every body part has an HP pool, or it's like oh your your thumb has 5 HP, so if you get slammed into a bus from a supervillain you break your thumb or something. um with 5e, I think its biggest problem is its combat is so slow. Like every level that you go up, it adds like 5 minutes onto every round of combat, it feels like, because everybody gets too many things they can do and then they take forever to take their turn. How do your how's your like action economy in your combat system? Is it just a multi-action economy? Is it like action, bonus action, reaction? How does that work?
So we have a hybrid system, I call it. It's a mixture of Pathfinder and D&D 5e. So you've got 4 action points that you can spend on your turn, and you also have 1 reaction per round. And you have a main action that's costs 2 AP, a minor action that's 1, and then movement costs 1. You also can get some free actions that cost 0 AP. Movement, the first time you do a movement action, it costs 1 AP, and then it'll be 2 every time after that. So in a lot of ways, like a standard turn could feel like a D&D 5e turn, except for minor actions. There's a lot more minor action options than like the bonus action options in 5e. But really, our game feels really familiar for 5e players. That was, that was my main experience when I was younger. I played 3rd edition with my older brother, and then I didn't play for, I think, about 10 years until I started playing 5e. And so, just kind of with that being a bulk of my experience, we naturally started out very 5e like, and then we kind of moved away from that as we designed the game and, tested things out. And so, yeah, it still feels very familiar though. People who play like Pathfinder and D&D 5e, it's like very natural progression, and you understand the rules very easily.
So with it being a level 20 cap, is it also a D20 based system?
Yes, we are D20 based, roll high, um, D20 plus modifiers,
Mm-hmm.
but it's hard to like just explain it without a lot of words. But we did a lot of like streamlining and simplification. So for your rolls, you're only ever rolling attack rolls and check rolls, and then also damage rolls, of
Mm-hmm.
course. Well, I shouldn't say of course because not every game has that, but we don't have like saving throws and then ability check, skill check, all these different things. We tried to cut out as many different terms as we could. That way, all of the kind of complexity is in how you're building your character and the choices you make instead of, you know, mincing minutia and things like that.
So how
It's
do skills
probably
work in your game?
Skills are something that some people, you either love it or you hate it. So they're completely detached from your main stats, which is agility, durability, power, might, and intellect. We don't have a social stat. because that's in skills, which are completely detached, from that. And when you use your skills, you're going to gain skill experience for that skill. And once you hit 10 skill experience in that skill, you will level up that skill.
Okay.
So it's a very like practice makes perfect sort of thing. The more you use it, you'll get better at that one. You won't just like get better at everything at the same, when you level up or something.
Yeah, as a veteran Call of Cthulhu player, like that's speaking to me. That's what I like is, at the end of every session of Call of Cthulhu or any character development, it doesn't have to be every session. You check a box every time you succeed in a skill. So like if you roll spot hidden and you succeed, if you roll persuasion, if you do like drive auto, whatever it is, anytime you succeed, you put a little checkbox next to it, and then you have the chance to increase that. So I enjoy that, especially in skill based systems when it's not just, okay, I leveled up, here's a couple points. It's like, no, I've been using this a bunch and this is increasing because I'm using it more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the reason we did that is we really wanted that the more you use it, the more you'll improve. And then it also kind of has this side effect where it really kind of incentivizes players to try to use their skills. So, it also, another thing is that there's not like a specific character that's going to be better at skills than everybody else, where it's like, oh, he's the guy who's just going to do all of our skills because he's got, all the extra expertise or proficiency and things like that. And so every character is trying to use their skills even during combat and stuff like that. It feels really good. It makes people try to do things a lot outside of combat.
What caused you to want to make this system to begin with, coming from 5e? Was it you wanted the superhero fantasy and like 5e wasn't providing that? Because you could technically like reskin 5e and turn it into a superhero simulator, but not as easy as you would think. What was your process in coming up with Indominant?
So I've always been very into game design. When I was younger, it was video game design. And then when I started playing 5e, I started looking at, tabletop game design. And I would always tell my dad my ideas about things, whether it was video games or tabletop games. And so I was telling him about a superhero idea I had for Dungeons and Dragons. And he just was like, without saying these words, he pretty much said, "You're always telling me all these ideas and they never really go anywhere. So why don't you just do it?" But all he said was, "Why don't you just do it? It's, you don't have to know programming. You just have to be able to write the rules." It's a lot harder than that, come to find out.
Yes.
Yeah.
But so when he said that, I was like, you know what? Why not? Like I had my friend Jared. He was the one who got me into D&D 5e. He helped me start designing the game, and he was on the team originally, and he's since stepped back. But yeah, it was really just that. I've always been wanting to create games and stuff, and there wasn't a superhero game, and I don't know, the way I learned 5e, we didn't do a ton of like homebrew in our group. And so my brain didn't go to let's change 5e to be a superhero game. I was like, let's make a superhero game.
Do you have anything to say to the 5e only chads that refuse to play anything other than 5e? Like, what would you say to convince them, hey, if you want to play a superhero game, instead of just homebrewing your rules in 5e, why don't you come try this system out?
I just am a big person of like being open-minded and trying new things. And so that's where my headspace is at on it. But really, at least coming from like trying to market Indominant, I would say it's really easy to learn if you've played 5e. Like you're not going to be relearning a whole new game if we just kind of jump in and I give you some pre-gen characters. You'll be playing the game like 5e in like 20 minutes, with very little problems and not a lot of questions.
Hear that? 5e isn't the only tabletop game out there.
As we've had like, I don't know, 4 or 5 game developers now.
Some people really are just I got into D&D 5e from Critical Role, so I'm a Critical Role,
Ooh.
person.
You're critter,
but
huh?
I'm a critter. I do like Matt Mercer is who I strive to be like. I don't directly copy, but like he's who I try to emulate the most. So I'll make sounds. I'm like, okay, you open the door, and I'll do stuff like that. But I get that from him. That's where most of my inspiration to start D&D came from. But I'm actually dipping my toe into other systems they're 5e adjacent. So Shadow Dark, that's like, I love that game so much. The first time I tried it, I was like, this is so much better than 5e. It's so much quicker, it's streamlined. I just was having a conversation with myself because I'm an absolute maniac in my car today while I was driving about, you know what I really am irritated with 5e is like, I want to have a epic end to my campaign that's been running for 2 years. So I want to get these player characters to level 20. But we're at level 14 now. Most of the
Wow.
party is level 14.
Did
Yeah,
you start at
and
level 1?
we did. We
Wow,
did.
that's awesome. That's impressive.
We've been playing for, it's been like 2.5 years. I think it'll be 3 years after January comes around.
Wow.
I made a whole campaign map. Like, I went all out. So I want to bring this campaign to like an epic end, but it is so stressful prepping for this campaign because anything that I throw at them at this point is, oh, well, I'll just cast a spell and I just deal with the problem. I just look at my character sheet. There's an answer for that problem. Whereas Shadow Dark is like, it's bare bones, but in a good way. So it's like, okay, you can do these things, but everything else should come from like role playing. So like, oh, there's a group of goblins in that room. I have a bow, but there's a chandelier hanging from the ceiling. So I'm gonna DM, can I shoot the chandelier? Whereas like players in 5e, I've noticed, really don't try to do that stuff because they have every answer on their character sheet. So I don't know. Sometimes trying new systems is a breath of fresh air. So that's kind of my opinions on you should try new systems
Mm-hmm.
from a 5e baby that won't play anything else. I once was, but now I'm trying new systems out.
Well,
Yeah.
I actually had a thought while you were talking, Anthony. So, with how important villains are to a good superhero story, something I've noticed in D&D is they do not have like very many established rules for how to run villains and how to like um either or escalate your villains, how to make them bigger threats, and how to essentially level them with the party. Is there anything like that in Indominant?
So right now, no, but with our comic editor's compendium, our like game master's guide, we're gonna have things like that where, how to have that sort of Joker character that's like always your villain, even as you improve. Lots of guidance for things like that, and um, leveling up. You can always level up a threat we call monsters threats, and so there's going to be creation tools for threats, and then also guides on like how you would level them up and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And Anthony, what you were saying to me earlier just kind of rang true for me. So we don't have like all these really crazy effects for your powers. So we've got like, I always say capital P powers. That's your powers that you choose from that are on your tiers. They're in the book. And then you've got your powers, which is fire manipulation. And so in combat, you use your capital P powers, and that's kind of mostly what you're supposed to use. But you can be creative and do things that aren't told in those powers because, our kind of approach is I can't tell you every single way that you can use fire powers. And so we're going to give you some guidance on things you can do outside of this list. But other than that, it's up to your creativity. And we've had a lot of people do things like that where it's like, oh, can I light that thing on fire? Or, there's some water, can I electrocute it and maybe like try to stun them and things like that. Or even just like shut down a fight before it happens using your powers or avoid a fight, things like that. So a big thing for us is like guidance on things like that. And then just that idea that the game's built that way where these are the things you can do. And then outside of that, you can be creative with your powers too.
That's cool because that encourages people to actually really absorb the fact that they're playing a tabletop role playing game and not a video game. So I was just thinking while you were saying that, like, I don't know if you have like laser beam eye powers like Cyclops from X-Men or something, or like Superman. But like let's say you're in like a crumbling building and then there's like a steel beam, you melt the steel beam so that like it falls down onto the bad guy or something, versus like you can't possibly write down everything into the character sheet, because there would be, a book of worth of things like, oh, you could melt the train, this melts steel beams, you could do all
Mhm.
this other stuff. So that's pretty cool. I like that you encourage like people to try to think outside of the box.
Well, I
Wish
mean,
it.
you look at like Batman in that instance. Like Batman's superpower once again is money and gadgets, and look at how much he's able to do with that. So,
Right.
Mhm.
let alone
Yeah, he does a
physical
lot of things like that.
superpowers. Like, oh man, like now what all can I do?
Come, come. Take a seat by the campfire. Did you know that you could find the Roll for Banter podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and YouTube? Wherever you roam, we're there to join your journey. If you'd like to support the podcast, consider leaving a like, a review or comment, or even sharing us with your party. Every bit of encouragement fuels our next adventure. Now, let's get back to the episode.
All right, Zarek. So there's a pressing question that we have to address here. How do you feel about realism versus non-realism in game design?
So I personally am a really big fan of realism, but the caveat there is not when it's going to impede the game or make things tedious and not fun. And so kind of just being, I guess a pun, realistic about when it's appropriate to have mechanics that kind of follow realism in a game and when not to.
Yeah, I think like there's games like Tarkov, Escape from Tarkov,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like realistic down to like you have to load the bullets into the magazine for your gun, and I don't like that far.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's going to for me that's going way too far. Like, dude, I don't want to have to. Dude, this is like tedious, in my opinion. I'm gonna get crucified for saying that, but
I know you
because
should have
Tarkov
chosen
players.
like DayZ, a game system
Well,
that has like a dying
there's you
player
have
base.
Hunt Showdown, and then you have Tarkov. Hunt Showdown and Tarkov have really quick time to kill, but like
Mhm.
Tarkov is completely different in that, oh, you have to make sure you eat or you're gonna starve to death. How did you tackle this? And did you do anything like this in your system, or how do you feel about stuff like that?
So when it comes to minutia, I'm a huge supporter of screw realism because in a TTRPG, like we're here to have fun and like experience a story. And unless it makes sense for the story, or you mentioned Shadow Dark earlier, I have the book, but I haven't played yet. But the torches, right? That's a very big thing in Shadow Dark. Is like your torch timers.
Mhm.
That's a place where the realism enhances the game. But tracking, personally, I don't think tracking ammunition or like, do I it's going to sound like I hate D&D, but tracking like, oh, do I have an open hand for the somatic component, and do I have a diamond that I need to spend to cast a spell, and or I need to reload my crossbow. Partially for a superhero game that just doesn't feel very cool, but also just personally for me, a lot of that is too minute of details to really care about for the rules. And so, like carrying weight, we handle that by just you have inventory slots, and certain items take up, one or two or maybe three if it's supposed to be like a big thing. Um, you know, like you mentioned, weapons. We've got weapon mastery is one of our power sets. You could either theme that to be like a sword person, or maybe someone with bow and arrow, or even pistols and like rifles. Never once do you talk about reloading in your powers. It's just assumed that you're going to be reloading as you need to because you're a superhero. So some of that, like I said, does matter with the setting.
I
For
was gonna
sure.
say, yeah. I mean, in a superhero game, I think it's fine to completely hand wave arbitrary things like, oh, how fast can you reload your submachine gun or something? It's like, okay, at this point, I like how you have slot inventory system. That's how Shadow Dark does it. I hate how 5e does it. There's so many times where I'm asking my players, who has this item, and everybody's like checking their inventory because they have like 400 things in their inventory, because it's like, oh, well, I can hold 400 eyeballs from these goblins that I've harvested, and I have to have all like crossbow bolts and berries that I've picked 4 months ago. And they just have like 4 pages of things in their inventory versus like if you just gamify it and say you have 20 inventory slots. If you're trying to pick up a golden statue, that's going to take up like 5 inventory slots. Like, I think gamifying a lot of things like that is perfectly fine. I can't even think of like why you would run a game where you're like tracking coin weight. I kind of just hand wave that for the most part, unless it's like an obscene amount of coinage. Like I
The
recently in
dragon
my game,
sword.
yeah, my players actually just met a brass dragon who was like in this town, and he was like a merchant lord. But brass dragons are good in D&D because they're metallic dragons. So he actually gave them 100,000 gold. And I described it as like he hands you these bags and you go to hold on to it and it slams into the ground because like 100,000 gold worth of gold is actually a lot. So they had to, just creatively think about how they were going to transport all of that gold. In that instance, I think it's okay to like bring up the fact that, oh, this is going to be really heavy. You can't physically take 700,000 gold coins from this dragon horde. But also, I'm not going to track, oh, you want to pick up all the goblins' weapons after you killed them or something. That's fine. We don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, you brought up a good point earlier too. With the realism versus non-realism, D&D technically kind of has like a weight system. It kind of has like a carrying capacity. I don't know a single table that actually plays with those rules. And so you look at like these characters and they're like, oh yeah, I have all this inventory on me. I have pages upon pages worth of
And they go, DM, what's this hair that I got from 4 months ago in real time that you
exactly.
just gave us? And I go, I don't know.
Or they're like, yeah, I have these things. And then it's like they always have them on them and they're always in the backpack, easy for access. And then we actually had something like this come up very recently in a D&D game we were running where uh, the players had settled down for the night. They were inside their camp, inside of this like trading post. And it was one of those like ramshackle trading posts. There's not an inn, there's nothing. So they were set up in like their tent outside of the trading post proper, and they hear like these like this fight going on, so they immediately start rushing out and they see like the captain of the guard, this guy that they were suspicious of, and several of his guardsmen. They were booking it into the forest. So I'm like, okay, are you guys going after him? And the players are like, yeah. I'm like, okay, well, what do you have on you, to make sure that I had track of what they had. And they're like, oh well, we're grabbing our bags and we're grabbing our weapon. And I'm like, okay, so you see these guys running off, you hear this scuffle going on, you guys are gonna stop to get like all your inventory, all the stuff, get your backpack on. And they're like, yeah. So I was like, okay, you guys do that, but that takes some time to do.
That's honestly, that's like a players role playing the situation bad, in my opinion. Like, I think if you have good role
Oh,
players, they'll say like, "Oh, I wasn't sleeping in my armor, DM, so like actually my AC is lower." I like players like that, and I'll give players like that like bonuses for role playing. Like, dude, you're not sleeping
oh,
in your plate armor.
no, I agree with you. They weren't sleeping in like their plate armor, so they didn't go in with like that. I don't think any of them wore plate armor though. But the problem is for them now, everybody's super far ahead, following this torchlight through the woods, and so they were looking through like the breaks in the trees, and they were super far behind. And by the time they caught up, whatever had happened had already happened. Because I know some of my players listen to the podcast. I'm not going to spoil what happened.
That's a good thing though,
But
because then you're punishing a bad decision that they made.
of course, but it's one of those things where it comes down to like, yeah, I'm trying to keep the realism in there, but like I love inventory slot systems where it's like, hey, like you have a bag and it has 5 slots, and so this item takes 3 slots, this item takes 1 slot, and now you have 1 slot left, or it's like, hey, I have a bunch of these 1 slot items I can just throw on there. So
Zarek, have you ever DM'd a 5e game?
Yeah.
How do you handle a situation where, and this is like a rare instance usually, I'm always like, I'm a very timid DM, I think. I'm timid, but like I'm stern on some things. So it's like a weird dichotomy that I have going on. So let's say your players are going to rest in a dungeon and they're saying, okay, we're going to take a long rest. How do you handle them getting ambushed in the middle of the rest. Like, do you ever do stuff like that to your players, or were you like, oh well,
Yeah.
you guys just decided to take a rest in the middle of this heavily kobold infested dungeon? Of course they're gonna come at you. Or do you like roll that randomly, or do you just decide, yeah, this was a stupid idea, you guys are getting punished for this?
I think it depends on the scenario. Like if it's like infested, it would happen, I would say, because a long rest is like 8 hours, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
um, versus if they were to like do things to try to keep hidden, like maybe they build like a fake, I don't know, like a little tent or, in Lord of the Rings when Frodo and Sam they have their
Cloak.
throw the cloak in and they look like a
Yeah.
rock. Like if
Uh-huh.
they do something like that, then I'll
It's a
probably roll for
camouflage the
it.
campsite or whatever.
Right. Um, but if they just go, yeah, we're doing it, and I'm gonna be like, yeah, you're gonna get attacked. Like, oh, guess what? You were asleep and you're getting attacked now.
How do you
Uh,
feel about every race in existence other than like 2 having dark vision in 5e?
uh, I I
It
think it
makes me
just negates
slam.
the purpose of
It
it.
makes me slam my head into a wall.
Well,
Yeah.
now with everything with Tasha's Cauldron, everybody gets dark vision.
I
You
wish
get
it was
dark vision. You
okay.
get dark vision. We
I
all
I
get
know.
I
dark
like dark.
vision.
I wish it was okay to say, "Hey guys, we're not using Tasha's Cauldron of everything," but if you said that to a 5e player, you would get crucified. They would go, "What?" This campaign actually said nobody's allowed to take feats. You have to go to a trainer who will teach you how to train in like heavy armor, and then you'll get like heavy armor master feat.
Okay.
We've been running this game for 2 years. Not a single person has done that. And then they go, "You didn't let us take feats this game. You don't let us take feats this game." I'm like, you know what, guys? They're like, yeah, well, we have to go to a trainer, and then we'll spend 4 months in this town trying to learn heavy armor training. We don't have time for that.
Yeah.
So it and feats are actually an optional rule. Players,
Yeah.
they're an optional rule.
Yeah.
I didn't
think
know
you
this is
guys-
what the. I didn't know this was Anthony's hill to die
I'm
on.
sorry. This is just me ranting as a dungeon master.
It's all good. But what I
Uh,
was going to say is I think you guys just illustrated some examples of where realism is really good and why I like realism. But then that's why in game design, I feel like realism is a lot less uh, something you should really strive for unless that is the point of your game. I would just wager not a lot of people will like a like hyper realism game, but it is good to have games like that because some people are going to like them.
Yeah, if only we
But
had Bruno here. Bruno saw a few years ago. I tried my hand at tabletop creation, and I was trying to make a very hyper realistic game, and it never got off the ground or anything like that. I had never finished like really anything outside of very early playtesting, and it was because of that. Because it was like, oh yeah, this is you had things for everything, and everything had stats, and like there were so many values to each armor and weapon you chose. It was like a medieval fantasy one, and so it was like keeping track of it all just became homework, and it wasn't fun to play. And that's when I really learned, like through that, of simple is usually better. We're trying to play a game. If we wanted these crunchy numbers, most of us would go to a video game for that. When we're trying to do like RPGs and stuff like that, when we're playing these TTRPGs, the simpler you can go, it's always going to be better. And there is a caveat in there. Of course, if you have like it's so simple that like everything's left up to the GM, and it's just, hey, we're playing make believe,
we
and
make
there's
believe.
no
Yeah.
exactly like a great example of like a game that is very well designed but simple is like Easy D6 for those who have played it. Um, it's made by DM Scotty, and it's a fantastic, easy, very basic, uh, easy D6 system. It's you roll 3 D6s for just about everything. You have the exploding D6s and exploding ones and stuff like that. So very simple. Spells are very flavorful. It seems kind of like that's where you've gone with your system is if you want it to be this certain way, a lot of the things can be covered and you just reflavor it to how you want it to be. So like uh for like an elementalist in like easy D6, it's more of okay, this person can throw out fire, this person can throw out like lightning, whatever they might want for that. It's just the same d6 damage, but it's just flavored as this is lightning, this is
Mhm.
rock, this is water.
Yeah. So flavor wise, yes, and then outside of combat, it's very rules light. inside of combat, I'm kind of a crunch guy, and so inside of combat's pretty crunchy, but it's not like Mathfinder. I know everyone says that. I really want to play Pathfinder. I actually haven't had a chance to, but um, not to that extent. It's a lot more 5e, similar in its math, but it's hard to explain. Like in a lot of ways, it's simpler, but it's because we've just cut out, trim the fat, so to say. And then outside of combat, like I said, it's very rules light for things like that, where it's like, I think I said it earlier. We can't write rules or an example or a mechanic for every single thing you could do with electricity powers. Like, so it's futile to try to do that, in my opinion. And then also, it would be overly restrictive too, because there might be something that seems totally logical, but we weren't thinking about it when we wrote the rules of what you can do with electricity. And so just leaving that sort of thing up to that, like, okay, I'm going to use my skill and roll my d20, and I explained to you, the comic editor, what I want to try to do, and if it makes sense for electricity and I made a good kind of like explanation of how it's going to work, then I can try to do it.
So you mentioned that combat is rather crunchy. Can you like walk us through a round of combat?
Yeah, so combat, you roll initiative, d20 plus your agility stat, and then everything you do has a combat stat. So for an attack, you're going to roll a d20 and add your attack modifier, and then you have to beat the target's defense. And if you beat it, you hit. If you roll a nat 20, you crit. There's also some other ways to increase crit chance or things like that. And then you'll roll your damage. For a check, if somebody's doing something where you're trying to evade it, you'll roll a check, and that's a d20 plus your specific stat. And, that's it. If you're doing that sort of power to an enemy, they've got to beat your power's difficulty, and that's determined by a flat number plus your control modifier. Like everything's named just like that. You add your damage modifier to your damage. You add your control modifier to your control effects. And so it's crunchy in that way, where it's like there's numbers, but it's not like crazy balloon. I've done 300 damage. Like things like that aren't going to happen.
Do the math.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys,
Yeah,
it's time to roll 40 d6s.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my big thing for realism is, and you said it, August, is for game rules and game design is generally go to less realism in the rules. Maybe you represent a realistic thing, but don't do it in a realistic way, like gamify it, like you said, Anthony. So, that's just kind of like my mentality on it. Even in fantasy, really, like I don't think tracking ammo or tracking, coin weight, things like that, it's just not really fun. It turns into like homework or, just a lot of work. And so let's just kind of hand wave some of that stuff, gamify it a little bit, and then let the fun things happen and keep the realism for how you handle situations as the game master.
For like physics and stuff. They have the bag of holding for inventory weight. So, Zarek, where can people find you if they're looking for you in the social media spaces?
So we've got our YouTube channel, Odin's Key Gaming, and then we've also got our website, odinskey.com, and that's where you can sign up for our newsletter to get your free PDF of the game system primer that we just recently updated at 2.0. Very soon, actually when this goes live, probably you'll be able to buy a physical copy of the game system primer on DriveThruRPG. And yeah, I mean, that's like mostly where we're active is our website and YouTube. And we have a Discord as well.
Absolutely. And as always, links are going to be everywhere in the descriptions. Pick up your copy of Indominant today. Thank you again for watching until the end. You can find the Roll for Banter podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Wherever you roam, we're there to join your journey. If you'd like to support the podcast, consider leaving a like, a review, or a comment. Even sharing us with your party goes a long way. Every bit of encouragement fuels our next adventure, and we'll see you in the next episode.